Welcome to our podcast presentation about the National Science Education Standards. My name is Alex McClure.
And my name is Christina Billson.
First, we would like to talk a little bit about the background of the standards. According to the National Science Teachers Association website, the history of the National Science Education Standards began in 1993 when a complete pre-draft of the Science Education Standards were created. After many improvements and suggestions were made on the document, it was released for nationwide review in December 1994. More than 40,000 copies of the draft were distributed and examined once again. The final National Science Education Standards were created by the National Research Council in 1995 and published in 1996. The standards were the result of 4 years of work by 22 scientific and science education societies and over 18,000 individual contributors. When thinking about the National Science Education Standards, it is important to know why they were in fact created. According to the standards text, the National Science Education Standards are designed to guide our nation towards a scientifically literate society. Founded in the exemplary practice and research, the standards describe a vision of the scientifically literate person and present criteria for science education that will allow that vision to become reality. The format of the document is divided into 8 chapters. The first chapter briefly introduces the standards, letting the reader know what they are and why they were created. The second chapter discusses the broad principles and definitions of terms that help develop the document. The next 6 chapters each discuss one standard of the National Science Education Standards. The 6 standards are Standards for Science Teaching, which is located in Chapter 3, Standards for Professional Development for Science, or for Teachers of Science, which is located in Chapter 4. Chapter 5 has Standards for Assessment in Science Education. Standards for Science Content are in Chapter 6. Standards for Science Education Programs are in Chapter 7. And lastly, Standards for Science Education Systems are located in Chapter 8.
Next, we are going to discuss the importance of the chapters. The National Science Education Standards are important because they outline what students need to know and understand about science at different grade levels. The standards are goals for achievement that are appropriate for all members of the science education community, meaning teachers, students, policymakers, and other individuals may benefit from the standards. Next, the standards provide students with challenges to promote higher level thinking and learning. Finally, the standards also give teachers the opportunity to make decisions in order to encourage productive learning. Our last important point about the National Science Education Standards is that they are very important when preparing science lesson plans. The standards are not a specific curriculum, however they are very essential in lesson planning. Teachers may focus on the science teaching, science content, and assessment standards and incorporate them in their lesson plans. In other words, teachers use content standards to display the science concept they are teaching that day. They incorporate teaching standards for how they would like to teach their lesson. And lastly, they include assessment standards used to assess the students during the lesson. This document can also be used to create goals and objectives of the lesson plans. And lastly, the document may also help teachers write and prepare lesson plans because it states what concepts students should know in science education at each specific grade level. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned a little bit more about the National Science Education Standards and feel more confident about using it in your future classroom. We also look forward to discussing more about the standards with you in class on Wednesday.